How I went from manager trainee at age 22 to being responsible for thousands of locations. It all started at age 15 when I got my first real job for $1.46.50 an hour as a busboy at Captree State Park and grew to supervise that location in less than a year. I absolutely loved it. For the next 2 summers as a high school student, I ran food concessions at Robert Moses State Park, Field 4, and I supervised 15 to 20 employees as we served thousands of hot dogs and hamburgers to hungry beachgoers. Although I completed my biology degree, I only spent about a year working in marine biology for Adelphi University. Then the calling hit me and I went into business. I became a manager trainee and after about a year managed my first restaurant. But running that first restaurant wasn't enough. I really was competitive and I wanted to grow, and my second restaurant followed only about 11 months later. That was what they called a control restaurant, where I supervised the training of 5 manager trainees at a time. I became a district manager only 2 years later, running 6 restaurants and eventually 12, and then moved to the rental industry and my first opportunity to go into headquarters. Eventually, I became a senior executive, was responsible for thousands of locations, started multiple companies, been a franchisor multiple times and a franchisee twice, and a business owner more times than that. What worked? First and foremost, the most important thing I learned early on in my restaurant career was the importance of being efficient. And it all started from a late night visit by the district manager and his boss, the division manager, a fellow named John Tisdale. John was my supervisor when I was a manager trainee, and at that point he was a district manager, so I'd gotten to know him a bit. And when he came into the restaurant that night, I was certainly comfortable in sitting and talking with him after we went through the restaurant. So we were sitting in a booth, and he asked me, "How many hours have you been working?" And I said, "Well, I've been working quite a bit. The restaurant's open from 7 a.m. till midnight, 7 days a week. I'm shorthanded, as you know. I need about 2 more shift supervisors, another 8 or 10 employees, and the restaurant was in rough shape, as you know, since you guys terminated the manager before me." John didn't accept that. He didn't accept my hemming and hawing, and instead he asked again, "So how many hours are you working, Bob?" And I said, "Probably between 55 and 60, John." And he said, and I quote, "I just want you to remember, Bob, that every hour you work over 45 is a measure of your incompetence." And I said, "Wow." And he rescued me a bit. He said, it's February and you've just been promoted. I'm confident that by this summer you'll make some giant strides. But don't forget that it's about team building, it's about hiring and training those supervisors, and it's giving up control. It's stop working and start managing." Boy, that was a valuable lesson. I'm inclined to think first and work later, but that just hammered it home. I started my journey trying to be as efficient as possible. So what worked for me? Certainly trying to strive for a 45-hour balanced work week where I could work hard and enjoy my family. Super important. Number 2, I've always been a team builder, and team building is something that just pays off so big in your business. I've always been a big goal setter, but I learned early on that it wasn't just about setting goals, it was creating the activities and then monitoring those activities to support those goals. And in my courses, I spent a lot of time on that because it's absolutely critical. There are so many that create goals, and even some that measure the success against those goals. But if you don't create the activity to accomplish those goals, quite frankly, you waste your time. So I think of this as kind of a weight loss goal. You could say, "I'd like to lose some weight." Well, I think we all know that that's a mistake. We need to create a SMART goal, right? Specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time boxed. Well, we can create a SMART goal like, "I'd like to lose 20 pounds by June 30th. And that qualifies as a SMART goal, assuming that there's enough time to get there, because it is specific, it's measurable. We're assuming it's achievable, it's relevant, and it's time boxed. But if we just set that goal and we don't set the activities against it, we're making a big mistake. So what do? We set a calorie goal. Perhaps we even set what we're going to eat within that calorie goal. Perhaps it's an Atkins approach or a keto approach where we're going to be heavy in proteins and fats, and we're going to really try to cut out the carbohydrates and the processed carbohydrates. We need to set an activity goal. And the activity goal is along the lines of, I'm going to work out 3 days a week, and then even deeper. And in those workouts, I'm going to do this, this, and this. And I'm going to make sure that my heartbeat gets to 140 beats per minute. That's how you match activities to a goal. And you measure or you view the activities to make sure you can reach the goal instead of just measuring the goal. The other thing that's really important if you're going to become a quality leader is you need to think 5 steps ahead. And I go back to my first vacation when I was a rookie manager. My wife and I wanted to take a week off. I think I'd been working about 2 years. So we decided we wanted to take a dry vacation up to Nova Scotia and Prince Edward Island. And for me to take that vacation, I had to put a lot of things in place. And one of the key things was to think through all the things that could and likely would happen in a restaurant in that 5 or 6 day period that we were going to go away. And this is pre-cell phone, so it was particularly important that a lot of planning was done. And this was during the time when I had the manager trainees. So each one of those manager trainees automatically had a binder that had all their training and work materials. So I put instructions for each of those trainees for what they needed to look at and accomplish on a daily basis. So you had 5 books and 5 sets of instructions for manager trainees, trying to make sure that nothing would go wrong. And then there was an assistant manager in the restaurant as well, and her job was to monitor the trainees and make sure that things happened as well. So this book gave me the opportunity to think out a lot of steps ahead. There was a Friday, Saturday, and Sunday in there, and Friday's business was quite a bit different than Saturday and Sundays, and certainly significantly different from the weekdays. So there were specifics relative to each day. And when it got to Monday, there were things like make sure the deposits get to the bank, make sure that the schedule gets written for the following week, etc. So plan out 5 steps ahead whenever possible. The payoff is significant. So when you add kids to the equation, the challenge gets tougher and the challenge gets more important. So balancing that time at that point was extremely important. And although I hit the 45 hours most times, there are certainly seasons in our career where we work a lot more hours. And for me, when it came to running the restaurants, most of those very, very long days were associated with new store openings. But it's important to realize that you will work extra hours, oftentimes Saturdays and Sundays, but you need to control those and you need to be looking for ways to be efficient as possible and to make sure that your team is doing the job. I go back to being a multi-unit supervisor running 6 to 12 restaurants when I was in Connecticut, New York. And I think about how the phone used to ring, especially at night. And it would be typically a problem that a restaurant was running into. Perhaps the fryolator wasn't working or there was a shorthanded situation. And the supervisor typically calling, perhaps the manager would ask me a question. And early on, I solved those problems. Boy, I just checked them off. I was so proud of myself to be able to give the answers and take care of all their problems. But the phone continued to ring and perhaps rang even more, especially as I added restaurants. And I finally recognized the importance of a different approach. And that approach was to ask them, what do you think is the right thing to do in this circumstance? Or how do you want to handle this? And when they gave me an answer, most times the right answer or pretty darn close to it, my reaction would be, great, make it happen. If you run into another problem, yes, you can give me another call, but I'm confident that it'll work out. Or if I heard something that was slightly incorrect, my reaction wasn't, hey, no, this is what you need to do. My reaction was typically along the lines of, so that sounds like a good idea, but did you think about perhaps doing it this way or this way? And people grew, and that's the key piece here. They grew in their ability to be supervisors and managers and hopefully eventually leaders themselves. Don't give your folks the answers. pull it out of them. You'll be setting new goals throughout your career. And I remember when I moved to my first headquarters position, which was a manager of franchise operations, the importance of listening to the franchisees I worked with. Now, in that company, most of the franchisees, in fact, all the franchisees that I can think of, were very, very successful, and most were founding executives of the company. So in most cases, they had a lot more experience than me. So why should they listen to a 30-something-year-old manager of franchise ops who's going out to their territories and is supposed to give them advice? So early on, I certainly didn't give them advice. I listened real hard, and eventually I would work with them to improve their operation, and sometimes it was about compliance. I remember talking to one of the senior operators one day and saying, "Hey, Rick, your trucks look pretty shoddy. What's the schedule look like for getting them re-decaled?" And that was a giant step for me at that point. And when I was promoted to Director of Franchise Operations and Development, the job started to change because I had earned some of the respect of the franchisees. And at that point, the task had gotten bigger and bigger. The real jump came when I was offered the Director of Operations position, responsible for hundreds of locations and eventually as many as 1,500 locations. So I don't want this to be about me. I want this to be about what you can do, how you can scale yourself. Yes, you'll be scaling your business too, likely, but how you can scale yourself to be more effective. This is all about working smarter, not harder. It's about working on your business the same time you work in your business. For me, the personal growth has never stopped, and it shouldn't for you as well. Some of you have left the corporate world and have started new businesses for the first time. Your corporate position was likely very different, and if it was similar to my case, a lot of folks came to you and they looked for you to make decisions, and you were very comfortable in that role. But now as a business person, a business leader, a business owner, you have to work really hard to be forward-facing with your customers, and of course working really hard with your team as well. I certainly welcome your comments about this YouTube video, and please like and follow, and we'll continue on this journey together.